Welcome to another edition of Coffee Break with Paolo. I'm Paolo von Schirach, your host. I'm president of the Global Policy Institute, a think tank, and I also teach at Bay Atlantic University, which brings you this podcast. Both institutions are located in downtown Washington, D.C., 2 blocks from the White House. Today, we're talking to Jennifer Hoffman, Senior Vice President of Business Development at Global Risk Intelligence and Adjunct Professor at Columbia University, Master in Enterprise Risk Management. Welcome. This podcast is produced by Switch and Board in Washington, D.C. Well, Jennifer, again, welcome. We really appreciate you being with us. And obviously, you, in this global economy, global world, you represent a very interesting industry here, because obviously we would like to think of globalization as this lovely harmonious orchestra where everybody's playing their tune and everybody's doing their thing and everybody somehow gets something, gives something, and all this rather smooth. But we know it's not that way at all. Globalization does exist, and in fact, if I may, please correct me if I'm wrong, we have created this very long tail of global supply chains and companies that are, on a daily basis, especially the big ones, that source their parts and components and services and whatnot all over the world, which of course assumes a certain, degree of reliability and consistency, right? But then we know there are all sorts of traps in this whole lovely landscape. And that's what we would want to discuss with you. And with that is risk. It could be geopolitical risk, climate change, as we were discussing earlier, societal matters, civil wars, what have you. Tell us a little bit about what you do. I know it's complicated, but give us a flavor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this podcast today, Paolo. So yes, I'm Jennifer Hoffman, Global Risk Intelligence. I think that we should start out saying what is risk,
yes,
and say that risk, the best definition is probably uncertainty that matters. So risk is actually an uncertain event that matters. It could be a positive event or a negative event. Okay, and what Global Risk Intelligence does is it's a risk advisory consulting firm. We are located in Washington, D.C., as well as we have offices in London, Dubai, and Singapore. And we have a global network of resources around the world. We're really trying to identify risk and opportunity and assist our clients, whether they be public sector clients, governments, as well as United Nations agencies, as well as private sector clients, in trying to identify and forecast risk, as well as monitor and mitigate those potential risks or threats. We do that through specific consulting assignments, projects, or also through thought leadership, various different sort of projects where they're asking us to do a specific analysis of a situation. For example, issues with corruption in Nigeria, or something linked to Southeast Asia and talking about the supply chain, certain raw materials that are only manufactured by some companies that could become very critical for certain types of products, especially within the defense industry. So that's really what Global Risk Intelligence does. We are focused not only on enterprise risk management, looking at financial, strategic, operational, as well as compliance risk, but we're also focused very much so on geopolitical risk. So I would say we would call it country risk. And then we can also assist companies that work on projects or programs, so major industrial companies, to assist them with creating risk registers, identifying potential risks on a project, then mapping those risks, determining what type of contingency or opportunity you would allocate to that specific project, and then assisting them in monitoring that throughout the project if they win them. So that's really what we do.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Let's see if we can, kind of break it down by just maybe some hypothetical.
Sure.
Let's, off the top of my mind, I am Boeing, okay?
Yes.
And I've got a problem, right? We know. Everybody knows a little bit about this because of the accidents that have occurred only a few months ago, the two airliners that went down. And although we don't know all the details, there seems to be a combination of various factors, including malfunction of some software, hardware components in the 737 MAX.
Right.
This thing is not going away. And it seems at the moment, I was just reading recently that it would appear that whatever fix Boeing is working on in cooperation with the Federal Aviation Administration, it may stretch into next year. So I am Boeing, and I say, boy, how bad is this? How many clients am I losing here? I have so many, the downside can be brand image, reliability, trustworthiness, customer satisfaction or lack thereof, damages. Imagine all these planes that are grounded. At some point, they'll have to pay for all this, right? Okay, imagine you talking to Boeing. What are you telling them?
So thank you for that question.
Easy one.
Very interesting, and actually something that's somewhat on our radar. I think what we would actually do is say, listen, these things unfortunately do happen. You have to sort of identify the different types of risk. The first one that you spoke about is really reputational risk. You named it brand risk. But one of the first things is actually make sure that you have a common language that we all understand. So you identify and categorize the certain types of risks that you're going to be looking at, identifying and managing. The reputational risk that Boeing has, is dealing with right now, and the bad reputation, very negative, is something that we would say, listen, why don't we create with our artificial intelligence platform, with supporting us, we can start scraping, tell me if I get too technical, but scraping social media. So that would be Twitter, that would be Facebook, Instagram, all of the various different, and media, but the open source media, to identify whether there's negative or positive feedback, and to do sort of a sentiment analysis. Now, this is something that, in the past people have done, and you spend on, consultants working, identifying what certain stories or what type of reviews you're looking for, and going out and reading papers or looking on social media. Now we're able to utilize artificial intelligence, machine learning, to be able to scrape that, not for one day or one time, but it can happen every day. And once you do that, you create this sort of algorithm, a bot, to be able to do that and then categorize the sentiments.
So kind of trend analysis.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you're really able to do all sorts of, and we're not going to give you answers. We're going to give you data, categorized data, information in sort of a dashboard that then you at Boeing will be able to look at, because you're the expert of your industry, but look at that and then say, okay, there are customers, there's certain negative sentiment around a specific, maybe in a specific area in the world or a specific region or about a specific topic. And so then you're going to start doing maybe a marketing campaign or some type of mitigation plan to make sure that that improves. It's just like sales campaign, right? You're looking, what am I doing wrong and how can I improve it? And let me target those people so that it changes. Obviously, that's the reputational risk. Okay, so you're going to have various different levels of campaigns. One is going to be towards your clients. Another will be towards your stakeholders and shareholders, obviously, because you're going to also do a sentiment, you're going to maybe link sentiment analysis with revenues and notice how they've changed and why they're changing and where they're changing, and maybe, and how obviously Boeing is working with various different airlines. Those airlines are going to be maybe no longer buying Boeing, right? So you have to understand what you need to do to mitigate that risk. And we try to
And then can you say also we can do scenarios saying, okay, if you solve all the technical software issues, whatever they are, by this date, we can forecast this to be the impact on the stock price.
Yes.
If it's going to be another 6 months, it's going to be potentially X, and we can forecast that you're going to lose these many new orders.
Exactly.
And that Airbus, your main competitor, is going to capitalize on this, but maybe not on that. These are the kinds of things.
These are the type of things that we can do, and we can do thanks to artificial intelligence. Obviously, what is key about machine learning, and when I say artificial intelligence and then switch to machine learning, I'm using them somewhat as synonyms, okay? You need to know what type of question you want to ask the machine. If you ask a machine a specific question, it's like with a child or a student, you need to not only ask the machine the question, but you also have to provide it data, the right data, to be able to find the answer. You can load lots of data, and that machine, that computer, will be able to crunch it and come up with the answer. But you also have to train it. So what we've started doing is creating algorithms, bots, and asking various questions so that the machine becomes smarter and smarter. We're doing it with sentiment analysis linked to revenues and with stock prices, as well as sustainability, climate change. Noticing that certain investors are now investing only in companies that are very keen on sustainability and, trying to make sure that the footprint, the CO2 footprint, is small.
Okay, well, let's jump into that with such a big topic, climate change, and obviously it's how can I say possible or likely or feared how can I say implications. This is extremely complicated, and let me just say this. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have obviously a planetary issue with diverse actors, and obviously in different countries there is perhaps different levels of sensitivity to this. But also there are, it seems to me, a lot of misconceptions in terms of what actions can be undertaken now and the impact of those actions. I mean to say, people, I think in the UK, I just read something recently, they're saying somebody came up with an idea to saying every person who is an airline passenger has a right to one flight a year. Each extra flight, you pay a tax. And their tax would be commensurate to the CO2 signature that your seat on that particular airplane would bring. To me, this is folly. I mean, this doesn't mean anything. That, yes, of course, do airplanes cause pollution? Absolutely. But is this the way to do it? Is this the way to mitigate or counter the problem of pollution caused by jet fuel? So in other words, what I'm trying to get to is this. There is the perception, and I don't know in what way this affects industry players and others, that certain things are absolutely urgent and necessary, have to be done now because we want to stop this thing, when we know that those things wouldn't change anything. In other words, it's a gesture, maybe makes you feel better, makes you feel green, and therefore, oh, I'm a good citizen. But in reality, until China and India continue to depend above 50% for all their power generation on coal, whatever we do makes very little difference. So where are we on this? In other words, there are all these risks. There is things that can be done that at the very least can alleviate something or mitigate. Where are you on this? In other words, companies, in what way are they impacted on this problem, in particular when, as you were saying, investors' sentiment is we want to put money in companies that seem to be, how can I say, wedded or embracing a sustainable model and this and that. What's actually going on here? And how do you advise a company that comes to you and to say, I'm impacted by all this? What's happening here?
So thank you for this question. It's definitely a difficult and complex one. I think that, as you said, climate change is a reality. We're seeing all sorts of flooding, fires, or all sorts of difficult situations around the world, not just here in the United States, but everywhere. And I think that corporations and investors, as well as just the normal people, citizens, are realizing that it's reality. So yes, it's true that probably the tax on a flight, if you take more than one flight, is definitely not going to make that much of a difference because people are going to pay, and it almost seems as if it's going to be a premium that maybe the airline will then just put in and see on their balance sheet, but on their financial statement. However, if you're able to translate that tax into research and development and doing something for climate change, against climate change and sustainability, and trying to create new types of fuel that can be utilized, something that's not as detrimental to climate, then yes, I think it is worthwhile. I think that some of the things that have been going on, I remember back in the day when I went to school, everything was on paper. We didn't have computers. I mean, in high school, Apple had come out with the first, Mac. Yes. Exactly. And then some people were lucky at university to have one, or you had a word processor. But everything was on paper. And now think about it, a lot of things are just electronic. We go to events, we go to conferences. You're not getting the printout of presentations. You're actually just getting maybe a USB key, or people are sending you an email with the PDF of all the presentations. So we are doing something. Now it seems intrinsic. We don't even think about it, but we're actually being green. We're not cutting down trees to make paper. The same thing with recycling. I think that there has been, and there still is, and if we don't make it, as the airline's trying to do, put a tax on it. For example, with recycling, some schools, even here in Washington, D.C., and maybe it'll come even here to the university, are banning plastic water bottles. So they're actually they are no longer selling the water bottles, and they're asking that everyone has their own containers, and they have a fountain where you can fill it up. These are just, they're simple ways of actually making a difference. In terms of a company, I think we can look at some of the oil and gas companies that we know well, right?
Yes.
And see that, yes, their business, in some countries, that they're still going to be utilizing various different forms of oil and gas that are not good for the climate. However,
that's it.
However, they're no longer just looking at that market. They're they're actually doing a bit of a
Hedging.
diversifying a bit so that they're able to start looking into green energy. And they're trying to figure out ways of maybe recycling or very innovative ways. And I think that if people don't get pushed to do it, then it's not going to happen. And so I think that that's why investors are really trying to push this sustainability, because we really do see not only with flooding, fires, but the flooding is a real issue. And I think that I'd like to talk about flooding, because here in the States, but it's really everywhere. I mean, even in Venice, for example, you look at Venice, that's sinking. Mm-hmm. And there's Save Venice, and they've created the Moses, and trying to make sure that that this patrimony, the UNESCO does not sink, right? Well, the same thing is actually happening here in the United States. The seaport in Boston, which is now becoming this big, let's say, corporate city center of Boston, where General Electric has just, built their headquarters. It's sinking. The same thing's going on in Miami, and it's sinking fast. There are beautiful islands like Nantucket that are sinking. And even, we don't know this, but actually there's a lot of funds and financing that can be utilized, that thanks to the United States government and probably other governments around the world, are actually able to assist in mitigating, utilizing certain innovative techniques to try to slow down that process.
As a risk analyst, of course, you're monitoring all this stuff probably on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But considering that, reversing this phenomenon is going to be a really, really long process. If I am, a company or an investor, a big, whatever, conglomerate, and I want to say, I think I come to you and I say, I really think the sweet spot is as impact mitigation.
Yes.
Would that be smart? Would you tell me, from a risk analysis standpoint, mitigation efforts, which would be like in New Orleans, which is underwater, put some more money in bigger levees and stronger pumps, so to make sure you don't go underwater on the next hurricane, or whatever else there may be, in terms of providing relief to those who are mostly affected negatively or likely to be negatively affected by climate change. Would that be something good, or based on risk assessment? Or, of course, it depends which place. And
yes, it depends. But I would definitely say that impact and with today with social media and the internet, you're able to see something right away. So I do believe that doing some kind of infrastructure work in mitigating that potential, that risk, as well as doing some PR, something very much in one's face, showing that you're assisting the people of New Orleans, not only building, but also doing something for those that have really suffered over the past, I think it's 16 years since Katrina, maybe more than that. That is important. So you need to do not just, it has to be sort of a roadmap of various different actions. There's not just one mitigation plan that's going to work.
Sure, lots of different
things. But I would definitely say that working on identifying and then actually saying, this is my roadmap of mitigation, so that I have not prevented this because it's already happened, the event's happened, but I will try to prevent it from happening again. Mm-hmm. And I will assist those that have suffered under that. So then that I think for one's reputation is going to be very positive. And obviously you're going to do business hopefully in a more green way, but you're going to continue to do business similar to what you've done before, with the idea of what the risks are and what the opportunities are. That's really, you have to, I think it's similar to like going to the doctor. In certain cultures, you only go to the doctor or to the dentist when you have a toothache. right? Here in the United States, you're told you go to the dentist for a checkup before you ever have that toothache, and you're going every 6 months, and they're asking you to come, and so you're preventing the potential toothache. In other cultures, you're actually only going once it's happened. I think that risk management, which is really interesting, is much more evolved on the strategic level in other cultures as opposed to this. Here, financial risk management, is well known, even though we've had some major crises, right?
A little hiccup here and there.
Exactly, because risk management, it doesn't seem too, intriguing. It's not sexy, right? So people sort of say, okay, thank you for identifying those risks, but let's talk about business. Mm-hmm. Whereas nowadays, I think that it's really evolved, and it's even been asked by Trump administration has asked that enterprise risk management framework be implemented in all the agencies. Yeah, so it's getting there. I think that at the end of the day, as I said, like going to the dentist or the doctor, it's better to identify and know and then try to prevent as opposed to going once it's already an issue.
Let's switch gears completely.
Sure.
And let's talk about a volatile situation that's kind of in the news on account of the of the diatribe between the United States and Iran, right? That we know about since this administration withdrew from the nuclear deal and then imposed sanctions, and then there's this pressure. And and so I am, say, Lloyd's, okay, and yes. I'm insuring tanks. I don't know if they are in the tanker insurance business. Right. I assume they are, big insurance company. And I'm saying, I got all these tankers insured in the Strait of Hormuz. There's this business between the United States and Iran. There's been some shooting, not much, but a little bit. Is this going to get any better, worse? I mean, what am I doing? And do I continue to insure tankers? Do I jack up, premiums? How much? I mean, I'm sure they have people working around the clock on this, but maybe they're not satisfied with their in-house work, and they come to you.
Right.
And then what's doing here?
I think what I would say was, first I would ask what exactly understand their as is and what they are doing, and whether we are able to bring something more to the table. I think in terms of the tensions it's become a very difficult situation. Talking about tankers, I would actually offer them something that we started working on, maybe mapping the shipping routes, looking at doing some monitoring of the ports in the area, and understanding what is really being transported around that area, and understand also with the drones, really what's going on, and utilize, once again, you can utilize artificial intelligence to be able to have constant input and create sort of a dashboard in that area, tracking, obviously the tankers are already being tracked, but to understand if there's any kind of issues or heating up, whether by scraping social media, by utilizing cameras, sort of a mix of different technologies to be able to identify a potential threat. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And then once you've got that sort of organized and put together, then you're able to utilize that information daily. I mean, you're going to get that input every day. And what is key to that, it's not just the one-shot event, one day, or even a 1 month, what's going on, is actually then doing a comparison analysis of what was it like last month compared to this month, compared to next month. So that then you see if things are heating up, you're going to see that trend.
Yeah.
Right?
Again, along, I guess, somewhat similar lines, but where I think maybe it gets more complicated because scenarios probably can change dramatically without warning and without, any trend analysis helping you much. Let's say we are now in this major confrontation, the United States with China,
Yes.
right? We sort of kind of know the elements of this, our concerns about the Chinese not playing by the rules and doing all kinds of things. At least these are all our allegations.
Right.
Not respecting intellectual property rights, forcing technology transfer, market access, et cetera, et cetera. And the situation is tense. Bad at the moment, not catastrophic, but tense. And obviously there is risk in the air.
Yes.
But I am, any of the big tech companies in the United States, which, as we were saying at the very beginning, depends almost entirely on a supply chain which is largely based in China. Again, things are not all made in China, as we know. China kind of is the final aggregator of inputs that come from sometimes either different firms within China or different companies, whether it's in Malaysia, Taiwan, South Korea, whatever. But if something really bad happens and this supply chain is literally severed, broken, and I am Apple, I got no products.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like there's a trend analysis which allows me to soft land,
Right.
and adjust progressively and mitigate. But I could be literally all of a sudden with no products because the shipments from China are not coming. Is this kind of, oh, come on, this is too much, it's never going to happen? Or do I have to be ready for this?
Okay, so what you just described is sort of a black swan, right?
Yeah.
If it happens one day and there's no preparation. But smart companies that plan and that do
Smell these
have...
things.
Well, that's why you're spending money on risk management and doing all sorts of analysis, and you're really focusing in on your supply chain, and you're going to be identifying backup plans, what if scenarios, creating those what if scenarios and identifying how you can handle it and mitigate that risk if that event actually does occur. So I would say that it would slow down production and distribution, obviously, but it's not going to destroy it, right?
So you're confident, in other words, that people are doing their homework.
I believe so.
But sometimes they don't, right?
Sometimes they don't. Oh, there are companies as well as countries that just do not do this. And
so all potential customers.
Again, all potential customers. Yes, all potential.
Okay,
customers.
we'll send them to you.
Listen to
listen to Jennifer.
No. I think that there people are and have always been doing risk management for centuries.
Insurance, I think, goes back centuries, if not millennia.
They go back way back, and what's interesting is many companies say, "Oh, I don't have a risk management department," but I ask the question, well, how long have you existed? And if it's 100 years or so, well, it means that you know how to manage risk and take off on your opportunity, because it means that you're a good entrepreneur and you are managing it. You just don't realize, realize the framework that you're utilizing. And so you just need an advisor to assist you in trying to map that out in a more programmatic way, but you're already doing it. Nowadays, I think it's fundamental, especially if we're going to be utilizing technology to support us. And I'm not saying that, for example, risk analysis is not going to be substituted. No one can be substituted by the machine. However, it's going to be supported by that machine. So a lot of the more manual tasks will be done by the machines, and then the decision making or the strategic analysis of all of that data that's been organized and categorized into a dashboard will then be analyzed by a human. So I think that there's still opportunity, and I do think that you're right. There are a lot of companies and countries that don't look into, certain black swan risks. I mean, what happened a couple of days ago in New York when everything
lights went off.
Exactly.
Yeah, poof.
In the subways, elevators. I mean, obviously, hospitals, for example, hospitals are some of the, on the forefront of risk management.
So they have to have, in this case, generators in order to
exactly
provide power.
Exactly.
Yes.
But for example, you look at Venezuela. I remember being in Caracas, and the lights went out. Electricity was gone for over a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way it is.
Mm.
And you're at the airport and I mean, nothing works. You think about the process. They look in the computer, they check you in, they take your bag. Nothing worked. You just have to sit there and wait
until power is restored.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about a little bit, switch gears, and let's talk about things which are sort of, how can I say, new phenomena, which I think are concerning, but that we can kind of monitor because they're kind of slow moving.
Yes.
Like, for instance, demographic change, right? And we see, the Western world in general, for whatever reasons, fertility rates are going down. Yes. In some countries precipitously, yes. In others more softly, while we see fertility being higher in poorer parts of the world. Yes. And that, leads some people to make really dire forecasts of saying, this is not going to hold together much longer because there will be the migration of the poor, so to speak, trying to land in more, auspicious places. And we certainly here in the United States see a little bit of that in the migrants from Central America. Yes. Who come here because obviously they are in terrible circumstances at home and trying to come here. That's not so much an issue of fertility, but of complete chaos and disorder. But we can come to that in a moment. But let's say take a country like Japan, which is kind of a textbook case. Yes. Where fertility has been declining now for years, so it's nothing new. Right. But there are all sorts of implications to this. I mean, if you are talking to a Japanese company, many of them are maybe multinational companies, and so their hedging consists in moving in different markets. But if you're largely exposed to the Japanese domestic market, and all this is going on, what's the downside? What in terms of the diminution of the population and the aging, rapid aging of your population, which is also ultimately whatever business you're in, your customer base. Yeah. What's the problem there? And how do you address it?
I would say that in Japan, in fact, we wrote an insight about this issue maybe about a month ago regarding the age, the average age in Japan is much older, and yes, the birth rate has really gone down significantly. The real issue is Social Security. I mean, at the end of the day, who's going to pay for all these people? Because if they're not having the children that are producing and working, how are they going to be able to
collect?
Exactly.
When they get old. Yes.
And that same thing is happening in Italy as well. I mean, I think that you can look at, I'm not going to start shouting out different countries, but I think that there are various different cases of this. Whether there is, I know that in that insight, we did talk about different ideas of how Japan could handle that. Once again, they were investing in technology to be able to do certain more, let's say, remedial tasks to become more productive. And they were investing in technology to be able to do that so that the productivity becomes, even though it's just one person as opposed to 5, the productivity is at the same level, so that they're actually going to be able to produce at the same capacity.
So this would be kind of their own idea of mitigation of,
Exactly.
of a problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
I don't have an answer, but I think that it's very interesting. I think that obviously in Europe, there's been a flow of migration from Africa as well as from other
Middle East,
countries.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that has assisted. It's created great tensions, but it has assisted in some of the positions that a lot of the Europeans don't want to perform anymore.
Yeah.
And so those countries, I mean, France being one of the best examples, has become much more integrated. I think that other countries are having issues with that. And so then you've got the nationalist movement, and I don't know what the answer is.
But that's obviously there are different risks,
Yes.
I would say there, because
Of
obviously
course.
the politics, as you just mentioned, become more radicalized, more confrontational, and then there is this whole problem of integrating into the mainstream society millions and millions of people who, because of their origin and circumstances, are very difficult to integrate.
Exactly.
Culture, language, religion,
Yeah.
also level of education, which in most cases is practically non-existent. So all right, well,
Those risks, yes, they are different. However, they're correlated. And so if you look at one, you can maybe mitigate it, but then you realize that the other correlated risk may become of a higher profile. So you really have to try to look at the various different risks and their correlation together. You don't want to just look at one and forget about the others.
again, different front here, and I'm bombarding you with different scenarios. One risk that some people say, oh my God, the sky's falling, got to do something about this, and we have to take action immediately. And other people say, oh, no big deal. Here in the US, but in other countries too, the national debt, right? We have seen that our deficits are growing substantially, and our national debt is ballooning. Now, under present circumstances, because in large measure the sort of repression on interest rates successfully performed by the central banks in the US, in Europe, in Japan, elsewhere, getting into debt seems to be rather low cost and, quote, low risk, because, it's like almost like you're borrowing free money. And if that's the case, more, if it's free, more,
Why not?
Why not? And others say, no, this is really terrible, because at some point the bills come due. Again, this is almost a stratospheric size problem, which affects obviously the federal government here. It affects in different ways state governments, although they're subject to usually state constitutions which oblige them to comply
exactly.
with some balanced budget kind of requirements and at least limit exposure to these kinds of level of debt. But is that from your perspective as a risk analyst? I'm not talking. Obviously this is a political issue. All kinds of things are involved here. But are we headed in a bad direction? Because again, just to conclude, Japan has been in this situation now for decades, and people say, "See, Japan, national debt, 240% of GDP, nothing happened. The sky didn't fall, so we can do it too. We're only close to 100%, so there's a long way to go before even get to Japan's level." What's your take on this?
I would say that at the moment, if I had to identify risk regarding debt, I would not focus on the United States. I would focus on Europe. And I would focus on the fact that because of the various different issues with the European Union, whether there's going to be, Brexit, Italexit, Grexit, all of the different, I think that their, the European Central Bank, that's going to be the first one that really has to face this huge risk. That's my personal opinion, because I did live
there,
in Europe for many years. I also, through friends and colleagues, talking to different people at different institutions, I think that that's a real issue. I think that it's underestimated. I think Italy, for example, is the banking system, and now that Draghi is no longer, or he's stepping down, I think it's going to be an issue, and I think that if one of those dominoes falls, then the entire system is going to fall, and that's when, yes, we're going to have to mitigate that risk. And I think that often a lot of the government, but also banks, entire banking system, is preparing for such an event.
And how do you do that? You have to set aside, obviously,
you do,
reserves or for cover for bad loans. I mean,
exactly.
What do you do?
But what if scenarios? I mean, you do various different what if scenarios, and I mean, some of the banks are going to probably go down. I mean, we've seen it happen before in the United States, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't too long ago. So, and it's going to be a big hit. But I think that there is a lot of liquidity in the market. Yes, there's debt, but there's a lot of liquidity. So that's why people are saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I think that we can, move forward. I'm talking about the North American market between Canada and the United States. Whereas in Europe, I'm not seeing so much liquidity. And I'm seeing stress factors in different countries that are indicators of potential threats that may occur in the near future.
Staying a little bit within this general issue of finances, here in the United States, and again, this happens elsewhere too, it seems to me that also due to the advantages of very low interest rates and cheap borrowing, leaving aside what happens at the federal government, which we just discussed, but even at the corporate level, there is, it seems to me, an increasing amount of risk due to the over-leveraging of companies. Yeah. And again, I am not a financial expert, but what I see is that if I can borrow almost at zero interest and issue bonds and get cash, and with that cash I repurchase stocks, and my stock goes up because, and then I get paid in stock options. Boy, I mean, this is paradise, right? I mean, that's a great formula for pretending that you have, a high-performing company where instead, I'm not saying it's entirely, but largely smoke and mirrors. And this is made possible by the ability to borrow at extremely low interest rates. But at the same time, companies are more and more, companies
leveraged.
May be productive, may be doing good things, but are extremely leveraged. And all this is predicated on these low interest rates to be maintained through Fed policies or other instruments essentially forever. Because I don't see anybody deleveraging here. Is that, I mean, I would say in your business, this must come up a lot.
So I would say that obviously banks, and not only banks, but also the various different rating agencies. I mean, because they've learned from their past,
I hope so,
lessons learned, that it's fundamental to look at all of the various different situations, understand not only if the company looks like it's making money, but really understand the, let's say, industry and what they're doing to invest and innovate, et cetera, how the organization is working, whether they have the right risk management procedures, whether they have, just general procedures, processes, it's working, and they're rating them on that. There are various different, they've also, sustainability has become part of ESG. That's become part of their rating factors. So I think that utilizing the rating agencies are giving you somewhat of a snapshot. Whether they're biased, and that's, once again, you could either read all that information, or you can give it to your machine and have the machine create a dashboard and show you sort of 1,000, the Fortune 500, and understand how everyone is managing debt and sort of rank that so that you have an idea. That is being done by various different institutions. So I think that nowadays there's so much data available that if you ask the right questions, you're able to get those answers, and and the banks, the institutions, are no longer blinded, at least in certain areas that actually look at the information. If you're not looking at it, you can be connived by anyone, right? But I think that I believe people are making better decisions in terms of giving out loans, giving out bonds.
But these bonds are still there's a pretty active market.
There is. But there's a lot of liquidity. And if people believe in it, why not, right? I think that when they become junk bond, when you realize that there's nothing behind it. But if there's the analysis being done and you realize that the company is producing and they're making
stuff,
right?
They're
not only
value.
Stuff, but
there's
they're
value.
producing, there's value. Why not lend money, right?
Okay, let me just skip and jump
That's
here.
capitalist.
I am, I'm Elon Musk, okay?
Okay.
And I've got this, as we all know, this great thing and this great vision of electric cars, et cetera, et cetera. Except I'm really not breaking even, right? We know that. And I'm not close. And I know that in some measure I depend on a favorable public policy environment because both the federal government, although less now, but many state governments, including the state of California, where I'm operating, is giving subsidies to buyers. Am I going to make it? In other words, I am having nightmares at night. I don't know if I believe in my product. I think I'm a trailblazer. I'm really, I've opened up new vistas and at least provide a proof of concept that electric vehicles are possible, and they can also be sexy, attractive, interesting, beautiful, high performance. But this is not, I'm telling all my people and my shareholders that I see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I don't really see it. Where am I in a bad place? Am I going to be? Do I have to sell myself to General Motors or Volkswagen or somebody because I'm just at the end of my rope, and I simply haven't figured it out yet, or is there a path forward?
Well, okay, so whether you have to sell or not is your decision, because
but
it's an opportunity.
But it's risk. I am evaluating the risk.
Risk and opportunity, right?
Yes.
Risk and reward. I think the risk and opportunity are the two different sides of a coin, right? So he's feeling this, the heat is on, whether he's leveraged too much and maybe betting on the wrong horse. I think that probably I would suggest to, do an as-is analysis. Let's look at the markets. Where is Tesla, right? Which markets? It's here. I haven't seen it in Asia.
China a little. Not a lot.
When I was in Beijing, I didn't notice them. In Thailand, didn't see them. Europe, I'm not seeing very few, if any.
In Norway, I think they sell it, which is not a huge market.
Which is not a huge market. So I think that we would have to discuss mapping out, what are your targets and whether you're able to actually have an agreement, whether it be a bilateral, certain agreements with the governments, because what's been done in California needs to be done in some of these countries, so that people, and that links once again to the sustainability and brings you back home, saying, okay, this is for the climate, this is for our world and for the next 5 generations. Let's invest in this and see if they'll subsidize. That would be one of the action plans that I would suggest. So you start making those strategic partnerships with the governments. Understand Germany, for example, has all sorts of solar power because they've subsidized for years solar. Why can't they do that with cars? Whether or not, yes, maybe you're going to have to create some kind of alliance with some German manufacturer, who knows? But I think that by creating some kind of partnership, or whether it's a strategic alliance with some of these European and Asian, so that it becomes something that it's not just American, right? That it's something that you're starting to push. I think that that's worthwhile, and I think that if you're able to convince those governments and those at that level, and then have them push the companies to do so, I think that you'll be able to succeed. Then whether or not you want to sell or not, I would sell maybe once I made those partnerships, so you don't
because you have something more valuable
exactly
to sell.
Right?
Yes, no, that's interesting. Who knows? Maybe they're doing this as we speak, But I wonder if being busy putting out fires every day,
Right.
if he's got the
His
time.
own fires.
Exactly. If he has the
vision,
foresight, the
right.
vision, and the resources to engage at the level that you level. Just suggested.
Well, another thing that he is doing is the infrastructure, the train.
Sure.
So I think that vision is phenomenal. I think it's great. The question is whether it's going to become reality.
Mm-hmm.
I on that point, I don't know, and I'm not sure. I think that if you look at other models and you see what's going on in Japan and China and, high-speed trains, are we sure that this is going to be? Maybe not. I think that you need to go on the horse that rides. This one, we're not sure if it even,
If it even drinks.
moves. Exactly.
Okay. Oh, well, I mean, this is obviously extremely fascinating. Again, let me press on. I mean, obviously, I like to think about issues related to energy. But the flip side of Elon Musk is obviously is oil, right?
Yes.
And I was just reading today a piece by former Senator James Webb of Virginia, who apparently is now running some kind of an outfit that promotes offshore drilling.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And his point was, there is so much oil and so many potential hydrocarbon reserves in the continental shelf of the United States, but they're all off limits because of all the sorts of restrictions for environmental reasons, etc. We should open them up, and because this is all strategic assets for us. Again, of course, there is global warming, blah blah blah, but that's in the future. At the moment, oil is what we need, and we're still importing quite a bit. He says he didn't mention that we import most of it from Canada, which is not extremely problematic.
Right.
But here's the thing. I am a multi-billionaire, and there's some new company that has this great business plan to explore offshore, and they need funding. They want money. They want me to invest. And they say, hey, we got this big plan and this and that, and we got the latest seismic this and that, and the computerized blah, blah, blah. We're going to find gazillions of oil because we know it's off Virginia or wherever it is. And as soon as we get the concession, we'll start drilling and we'll make billions. So we need, if you would be so kind, can you write us a check as an investor? And I'm looking at this and I say, oh boy, yeah, the technology sounds, real. The resources are probably there, but I'm completely in the dark about the regulatory environment. Will these people be able to do what they say they want to do? So this is policy and politics and sentiment, how does the public react to the notion that we are opening, the continental shelf to. So, and I come to you and I say, should I invest this money? Because it's $2 billion that they asked me to put in. I'd say, I'm rich, but it's a nice piece of change. I mean, what are the odds that this is going to go belly up, or is this going to work?
So I think that when you were explaining, it was interesting. You said, as soon as we get the concession.
Yeah.
And I think that is, a phrase that took maybe 5 seconds to say, but it could take
years.
Years. It may never happen.
Exactly.
Right? Infinity, because there are various different situations that will block, you getting that concession. You have to understand, first of all, the question I wanted to find out was, is the company a U.S. company or is it a foreign company?
The one
that wants to create do the drilling.
Let's say it's a domestic company.
Okay, it's domestic. Okay, because
that's my own. Because if I'm just making this up.
Yeah,
yes.
no, I understand. Because if it were foreign, you would have to deal with the what is it called? The FIRMA, which is the Foreign Investment Risk Review Act, where it's basically mapping out an entire process to identify whether or not you can actually come in and actually do that work and maybe acquire. Well, this is really for an acquisition to then perform certain things. But considering it's strategic and it's in our, offshore, it's something that obviously the U.S. government would want to monitor and make sure that it's okay. So that's the first hurdle that you would have to go through. Considering it's a domestic company, or let's say the hypothesis is it's domestic, I would still be very skeptical on, as you said, on getting the concession, the regulatory framework and understanding. Are you going to be able to shape that framework? Because if it doesn't exist, you're going to need to invest
in lobbying and
exactly,
all sorts
and
of
you're
things.
going to need to shape that framework. And how long is that going to take? And are you going to have the administration that's going to be, amicable in shaping it and making it happen for you, or are things going to change? You don't know, right? So I think that what we would do for you, for the former senator, is to look at past cases, historical examples, and try to map those out and see how long they took, similar case scenarios, and try to understand how long did it take, what were the various different factors, the variables, and then give a report of different opportunity, different potential scenarios. And then it's really the decision has to be made by the senator. But you need to give them the right information or enough information to make an educated decision, right?
So you provide orientation.
Exactly, orientation, and also probably roadmaps of, okay, obviously if you decide not to, why not? And have the various different factors and reasons why and examples. But also, if you say, yes, move forward, well, move forward if and why, right? And then also the timeline. because right now we don't know. Is the administration, and also it's not only the federal, but you're also going to probably look at, state administration. And as we've seen with infrastructure projects, you can spend millions and millions of dollars investing and trying to put together this public-private partnership, and then administration changes and it dies.
Nothing happens. And
you get nothing back. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure on that investment.
Okay. Obviously, let's have the globe as our focus here. Obviously, there is a risk. There's country risk, right?
Yes.
We got 190 countries, give or take.
Yeah, I think 192.
Whatever that is. So there is more and more focus on emerging markets, right, as potential targets for investors from the developed world. And for whatever is worth, there's also this new, policy shift, coming from the traditional donors, the World Bank, USAID, the European Union, who say, hey, we need to, we are in the business of development. We want to help these countries. But guess what? Belatedly, we figured out that our resources, our will may be there, and maybe we got smart people doing good things, but we just don't have the resources. We have some resources, but they're very limited. So we need to engage the private sector. Come in, help us out. Let's work together, and let's target this and that. But then, of course, the private sector, that unless we're talking about firms that really have long practice and experience, I don't know, Unilever or others who've been working in a variety of markets for decades. But many others have no clue. They have no idea. If you say, hey, am I going to make some money here? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, you're going to make money. Are you sure? Well, it depends. So I would think probably you are advising private sector companies on country risk,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
And of course, each country is different and blah, blah, blah. But how do you break it down? Because you've got obviously some systemic issues of lack of resources, lack of infrastructure, lack of power, etc. But then you've got politics and moving here and there, etc. I mean, I don't know how complicated is this, first of all?
So I would say, yes, we do provide country risk reports, and they are not only highlighting the risks, but also assisting companies to identify opportunities in their specific sector. Usually, depending upon whether they want just an executive summary, like a 10, 15 page, or a very in-depth report with all sorts of analysis and let's say a plan to actually enter the country, which could even go to 60 to 100 pages. We look at political risk. We look at, obviously, compliance regulatory risk. We look at financial and obviously strategic, which strategic, I would say, really has the political inside, strategic risk. Economical risk. We really map out, those are sort of the high level, but then we try to drill down and get into the specific risk factors that may impact their specific business. So if it was, let's say, a construction company looking at, I don't know, somewhere in, shall we say, Indonesia. No, we would map out the various different, just an overall macroeconomic analysis of the country, and then start looking into specific, the politics, whether things have changed. What's interesting, for example, I did one on Vietnam, and as an American said, political risk high? And I was challenged because the client said, no, it's not high. It's stayed like that forever. I mean, it's not changing. You know, the political risk really is if it's going to change on you. Because if you're able to create a relationship, and that's really what you want to do, and that's what we try to assist our clients in doing, is also having people, because it's a global company and you have a global network, having people in those countries, you know, not just giving sort of the Western perspective, but actually the local perspective, that you're going to get a different perspective and a different sort of insight into that country in terms of policy, in terms of regulatory framework, how to get business done, right? I think that's definitely worthwhile. In terms of making a fit and understanding whether or not to invest, I think in general, an emerging market is going to have high risk. There's higher risk but there's also higher reward. Mm-hmm. So it depends upon the company. You have to also get to know the company and understand
what their tolerance is,
their risk appetite is, mm-hmm. exactly, and what their tolerance is, and whether they're balancing, you know, okay, I'm going to take that risk. I'm going to invest for a certain amount of years and try to make it work. But I'm going to balance that by doing something elsewhere in a more stable country, right? So. And you need to, you have to balance. It's a balancing act. And I think that one of the things that we try to do is suggest to clients to always partner with locals. So we try to also, you know, assist in creating that relationship if they don't have one, because you can't just go into a country and think that you're going to be able to do what you're doing in your own nation or even elsewhere that you've been successful. It's you have to become local before you become successful.
And would you say that now, I mean, if you, again, I know this is overgeneralizing is dangerous and probably not correct, but if you look at different parts of the world, we've got Latin America, Central Asia, Middle East, South Asia, Africa. Are there areas where you would, you know, if you, in general, as a matter of principle, you would say, oh, you know, this looks more promising than that.
Right.
If you balance everything, political risk, level of infrastructure development, corruption indexes, market potential, spending power of the customers. I mean, you mentioned Indonesia a moment ago, which a country that I know very little about, but I found very intriguing.
Yes.
Is there any favorites
well,
of yours?
I think it really depends upon the sector, obviously.
Of course,
but I think that if one of the ways to mitigate risk in these emerging markets is obviously by partnering with an organization like the World Bank's IFC or, you know, the Inter-American Development Bank or the Asian Development or EBRD. So you need to, that's a way to mitigate because you're sure that the funds are going to be matched or that, you know, you're going to be able to make it work. There's the government, you know, to obtain those funds has to comply to certain levels of you know, ethics and procedures, et cetera, framework. Once you've looked at that and you see what's going on in these various different institutions and you see where they're financing, where they're spending their money. I mean, there's been a shift lately, I would say, I don't want to, you know, be wrong about this, but I think that there was in the past recently a shift to Asia, spending a lot of this money in Asia, and no longer in South America and Latin America. You know, a lot of the funds, at least, you know, let's say the World Bank funds are going towards Asia. I think right now, Africa is an interesting, opportunity. I'm even seeing, for example, the United States, not the federal government, but the Millennial Corporation.
Millennium Challenge Corporation.
Yes. It's interesting. What I would suggest to companies, and we can do that for them, is to actually map where these various different organizations are financing programs and looking at that and trying to get into some of those. Because as long as you're not the only one and you have someone, you're partnering with a organization, agency that is going to have your back, then it's okay. For example, the Millennial Corporation is doing a huge project in Togo right now, 35 million in trying to assist in creating a ICT framework for the country, as well as doing land reform. There are all sorts of opportunities. So once you understand the map of these opportunities that are being financed by different agencies, then you can determine, okay, my sector is telecommunication, then that's where maybe I should at least do an analysis, a risk analysis, understand the country,
So
understand the relations.
A corporation comes to you and I said, I am in this business. This is what I do. This is what I can do. This is my area of competence. I'm looking for new opportunities. I really know nothing about all these markets. Please help me out.
Yes.
You can do that.
Yes, we
At
can do
least
that. We can provide that
in increments,
exactly,
I suppose.
in increments. And that's the way it should be. It should be sort of, you do a first module, a preliminary assessment and say, here's the world, you want to focus, this is where the financing is happening in your industry. These are the different opportunities. Keep in mind there are certain risks. Then if they say, okay, let's do a, deep dive into this specific region, whether it be...
And you got into it.
And then you can go down, and then you can actually...
And you can see who else is operating
Exactly.
there, who your potential partners are, if you can link up with the
Exactly.
IFC or others that provide some, I guess...
comfort.
Yes,
We can call it
that
comfort.
would come risk mitigation,
Yes,
right? Because
exactly.
they share the cost of the investment.
And then there's also even MEGA,
Yeah, sure.
that can assist as well. Export credit. I mean, there's all sorts of opportunity while you are, trying to be a pioneer and break into a new country that may be an emerging country.
Well, so you help people figure out opportunities and risks and help them, I suppose, if they are taking the chance to go with some kind of a parachute or something
Exactly.
that helps them in case things turn, badly, that they have a plan of some kind.
Exactly.
Well, listen, on that note, which is a bit more positive and inspiring in terms of the things that you can provide to companies, I thank you very much for being with us. You've been listening to our podcast. Our guest has been Jennifer Hoffman, who is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Global Risk Intelligence and also an adjunct professor at Columbia University, Master in Enterprise Risk Management. As, if you haven't figured this out, we've been talking about risk. Thank you, Jennifer. We'll see you soon again.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.